The swamp doesn't sleep, not really. Even in the deepest part of the night, something is always moving out there. Frogs croak from the dark water, insects hum in thick clouds above the reeds, and the wind pushes through the cypress trees with a slow whisper that sounds almost like voices. Most nights it's just the swamp being the swamp, but sometimes something else walks through it. I learned that during my third week working the night shift along the rail line near Big Bayou Canot. The job itself was simple, just routine track inspections along the old rolling railway bridge that crossed the bayou. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous. At least that's what I thought when I took the position outside Mobile. The older guys who worked the line had a different opinion. They didn't talk about it much, but every once in a while someone would mention the accident, always quietly, always when the sun was going down. One of the crew finally told me the full story during my first week. Years ago, before I ever worked there, a barge drifting through the fog struck the railroad bridge over the bayou. The impact knocked the tracks out of alignment. Minutes later, a passenger train came racing across the bridge in the darkness. The engineer had no warning, no time to stop. The locomotive hit the damaged section of rail at full speed, and the entire train plunged into the black water below. Dozens of people died that night, some trapped in the wreckage, some lost in the swamp. The locals still call it the worst rail disaster in Alabama history, the Big Bayou Canot train wreck. I didn't think much about it when I first heard the story. Accidents happen, tracks get repaired, life moves on, but the older workers always ended the story the same way, with a warning. Don't stay on the bridge too long after midnight. When I asked why, they just said one thing, because sometimes the engineer still walks the tracks. The first time I heard the horn, there wasn't supposed to be a train. That's the part that still bothers me. My shift that night started just after 11. The swamp around Big Bayou Canot was already swallowed by darkness. Out there, the trees grow thick and low, their branches twisting over the black water like fingers reaching for the sky. Fog rolled slowly across the bayou, thick, gray, and quiet. The kind of fog that swallows sound makes the world feel smaller than it really is. I watched the rail line with my flashlight, checking the bolts along the bridge supports the way I'd done every night since starting the job outside Mobile. The metal rails clicked softly under my boots. The water below moved slowly between the cypress trunks. Everything was normal until the horn below. It came from somewhere deep in the fog, a long, low train horn, the kind that echoes for miles across flat land. My head snapped up instantly because I knew the schedule. There wasn't a train due on this line for hours. I pulled out my radio. Dispatch, you got anything coming through the bayou tonight? Static crackled for a moment, then the dispatcher answered, negative. Lines clear until morning. I stared down the tracks disappearing into the fog. You sure about that? I asked. Another pause. Positive. The swamp fell silent again. The horn didn't sound a second time. For a moment I wondered if maybe I'd imagined it. The fog can play tricks on your ears out there. Sound travels strange across the water. But then something else happened. The rails vibrated, just a little. Not enough to rattle loudly, but enough that I could feel it through the soles of my boots. My stomach tightened because rails only do what that when something heavy is coming, like a train. I crouched down and pressed my hand against the steel. The vibration pulsed through the metal, slow, rhythmic, like distant wheels rolling across tracks. except the fog-covered rails ahead of me were empty. I shined my flashlight down the line again. Nothing but mist and darkness. Then faintly, I heard footsteps, not behind me, not beside me, ahead. Somewhere out on the bridge, slow steps moving through the fog, one after another, walking directly toward me. At first, I thought it might be another worker, someone sent out to double check the bridge, but that didn't make sense. No one had mentioned another inspector on the schedule, and nobody walks the bridge in fog that thick unless they absolutely have to. The footsteps continued, slow, heavy, boots on metal, clank, clank, clank. Each step echoed faintly along the rails crossing Big Bayou Canot, the sound drifting through the fog like it was coming from a long tunnel. I raised my flashlight and pointed it straight down the track. The beam cut a narrow path through the gray mist, but I didn't reach far. The fog swallowed the light after maybe 20 yards. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded smaller than I expected. The swamp absorbed the sound almost immediately. The footsteps stopped, just like that. The silence that followed felt wrong, too quiet. Even the frogs had gone still in the water below. I stood there listening for a moment, waiting for someone to answer. Nothing. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time. Clank, clank, clank. They were definitely on the rails now, walking directly along the steel track like someone balancing carefully on the beam. A shape slowly formed in the fog. At first it was nothing more than a darker shadow inside the mist, but it moved. A tall figure, broad shoulders, wearing something that looked like a coat. My grip tightened on the flashlight. "Hey," I called again. No response. The figure kept walking, slow, deliberate. The fog curled around it as it approached, revealing pieces of the silhouette a little at a time. Ahead, a long coat, the kind railroad engineers used to wear years ago. A cold chill ran through me, because the closer the figure came, the less solid it looked. The edges of its body flickered in the fog like smoke drifting in the air. My stomach twisted as the shape stepped fully into the reach of my flashlight. The beam passed straight through it, not completely, but enough. Enough that I could see the swamp behind the figure through its body. The man stopped about 10 yards away from me. He stood there silently on the track, facing my direction, and then slowly, he raised one arm, pointing down the rails behind me, back toward the bridge, toward the place where the train had gone into the water during the Big Bayou Canot train wreck. The phantom engineer opened his mouth, and somewhere deep in the fog, a train horn screamed again.